Laura Mason pays Mr. Williams a visit. Damn. Okay, Maria, send her in. I rose from my desk, bracing for Laura's arrival. She was nearly 60 years old and a breathtakingly beautiful woman. We met years ago. My wife worked as her husband's executive assistant, so we were constantly socializing. I admired her until recently. Come, Mrs. Mason, and sit. Want to drink? Thank you, Ben. But no, where is Mrs. Mason today? It indicates that you have been Mrs. Mason for approximately 30 years. That was not what I intended. You've been calling me Laura for 8 years, and now it's Mrs. Mason. Recent events have revealed that I misjudged our relationship. Now I know we're not friends. Using your first name is no longer acceptable. Her expression contained a hint of sorrow. Changes in our dynamic are obvious, probably realizing that your wife is my husband's mistress, which you encouraged. Are you here to debate this? Ben, she's struggling without you. She is barely functioning, and her artwork reflects this. Mrs. Mason, that isn't my fault. This is primarily your responsibility, as well as Kathy and Roger's. Let me explain why this doesn't matter. Kathy has told me that you won't let her explain the whole story, so I thought I'd use this to my advantage. See, that's the damn problem, I said in a raised voice, suddenly angry. Everyone's trying to convince me that it doesn't mean anything, that I should just be okay with my wife screwing her boss. But I'm not, and I never will be. She was a person of integrity and hoped that, except for that one glaring exception, she would continue to be. I'll listen to you on one condition. After you've told the whole story and I've heard all of your justifications, you'll go to Kathy and do your best to convince her that there's no way back and get her to sign the damn divorce papers. I can't promise to convince her, but you can try. So far her parents have passed away, and she has previously stated that you were like a mother to her. We wanted to help her because she is like a daughter to us, which is another reason why your husband shouldn't be screwing her. If you tell her what you did was wrong instead of joining her and trying to justify it, maybe she will get it. She was clearly struggling with it. I lost interest in sex about 7 years ago. I did my best to meet his needs, but it didn't do anything for me. We stumbled along like this for about 2 years before it became uncomfortable and painful. I saw my doctor and even got a second opinion, but the outcome was simply that my body. Roger's libido hadn't cooled down, and I couldn't imagine how much it affected me when I lost the ability to enjoy sex. He insisted we stop because he didn't want me to go through that. I had never doubted it before, but I knew then that BJ was never really a part of our relationship, but we gave it a try. However, it never held much appeal for me, and even less so now, as I had no sexual desire. Neither of us felt particularly comfortable with him being that intimate with me in that way. As I listened to Laura Mason, I tried to imagine how it would feel to reach the point of having no interest in sexual intimacy with the person you've loved your entire life. Before this all started, we tried traditional dating services to find someone stable, but it didn't work. We should have realized that those people were looking for long-term relationships, not the opportunity to be someone's mistress, so we tried a couple of those sites set up for. As a last resort, we found a website that was set up for sugar daddy type arrangements. We actually met one very nice young woman, and that worked out well for about 6 months before she met someone special and bowed out. They got married and just had a child. That's great for them, Mrs. Mason. I'm happy for them. But can we get to the point here? I'm almost there. I wanted you to understand that we tried every other means we could think of to solve our PR. As I mentioned, she was like a daughter to us, and we were all very close, so we talked to her about it and the problems we were having. She was the one who suggested the sugar daddy arrangement, and we even tried it again. But the second woman we met decided to try to blackmail us by threatening to go public with what we were doing. Was the one who suggested perhaps we could find a married woman, one who was in an open marriage of some kind, or perhaps one whose husband traveled a lot and left her alone. Basically, a woman who was available for sex, but wouldn't need Roger for anything else, and who wouldn't want things made public either. I imagine that proved difficult to find, and I'm afraid that it was. Perhaps people in different social circles than us had more luck, but we simply... Yes, but that was what she did, what Roger had hired her for all those years ago. Most of our efforts were driven by her ideas. Roger and I had no idea what to do. She insisted that this was the only solution. She would never try to blackmail us by threatening publicity. She was in a very happy marriage, so she would never want more from Roger. And the final argument was that she and Roger loved each other, unlike you and she or H. The key, we realized, was to not alter those things in any way. Any liaisons they would have to occur during the time they were normally together anyway. She couldn't suddenly start staying later or coming to work earlier. They couldn't go out to motels for a long lunch. Christ, this was meticulously planned. All with the goal of deceiving me. Evening and in his. Did they get their kicks doing it while she was on the phone with me? Please, Ben. I understand that you're hurt, but you're trying to make this more sordid and humiliating than it was. The truth is that she treasured that time on the phone with you. She wouldn't even let him be in the room with her when she spoke with you. It was important to her that she compartmentalize what she was doing with Roger. To her, she was helping her friend solve a problem. And that was all. To her, the true love was with you, and she wouldn't allow him to intrude on that. I'm almost touched to hear that. She loves you to distraction, Ben. She needs you. But anyway, it was working very well until apparently one of the other employees saw something that made him suspicious and he tipped you off, as I understand it. When you showed up at the office, no one even tried to stop you when you walked into his office and caught them on the couch. I'm ashamed to say we were initially disappointed and angry at the lack of loyalty the staff showed before we realized how hypocritical that was. Indeed, a wife that's cheating on her husband, and a boss and his wife encouraging her to do so being upset over a lack of loyalty. That is ironic. It wasn't long before we realized that. And you basically know the story since then. You refused to speak with her and tossed her out of the house. It was mine when we met, so I sure as hell wasn't leaving. You wouldn't give her a chance to explain. She came home to you packing her things and you wouldn't listen? Or so she said. You just quietly packed her stuff and set the suitcases outside. Apparently you said 5 words. You will hear from my attorney too. That's pretty accurate. She didn't understand. As far as you knew, this could have been the first time, and she couldn't understand why you wouldn't listen. Of course, she didn't realize all of the planning and investigation you had done leading up to that day. You spoke to employees of the hotels and found out that her room was rarely used. You spoke to employees of the companies they met with on the road and found out. I had to know how deep the lies went, but it was all circumstantial evidence until I saw them together. That's why I hadn't kicked her out before then. Ben, she loves you so much. Isn't there some way to rebuild things? Mrs. Mason, where has Kathy been staying? Yes, where has she been living since I kicked her out of my house? Well, she's been staying with us, right? And are they still screwing? Ben, she wasn't spending any more time at work with Roger than she had before. She was only spending that time with Roger. They both have strong libidos and rely on sexual release to deal with stress, and this situation has been extremely stressful. She never once apologized for what she did. She was only sorry that I discovered it and was hurt. Mrs. Mason, if you've been married for a long time, you're probably aware that love alone isn't enough to keep a marriage going. Trust and respect are also necessary, and those are the 3 pillars of any successful relationship. If you lose one of them, things may still be stable, but if you lose 2 of them. I'm sorry things have turned out this way. Ben, it was never our intention to split you 2 up, and losing you for good will be absolutely devastating. But I'll keep my promise, I suppose it's the least I can do. She stood up, and I did the same. She followed me to the front door. She probably expected a hug, but all she got was a handshake. That was kind of you, Ben. She can be certain that you know the truth. The truth, as she sees it. I replied. She smiled and gave me a small nod before turning and, despite the relative calm I had maintained while speaking with Laura Mason, the entire conversation had been an emotional roller coaster, and I was suddenly exhausted. I returned to my office and closed the door, burying my face in my hands. She tried to persuade you to take Kathy back? Of course she used the same tactic that Kathy did. It didn't mean anything, and you didn't lose anything, so what's the harm? She promised to try to persuade Kathy to. Is it possible for her to get Kathy to sign the paperwork? Each day brings us closer to our wedding. I understand, baby. Even if she doesn't, I can tell the judge is tired of their delays. I doubt it will matter. She smiled and stood up, checking that the office door was shut. She raised her top and leaned forward, flashing a naughty smile. She touched my face with her beautiful flesh. So I gave both sides equal attention. She always jokingly said it was for balance. She vanished with a wink. I'd known Maria for 3 years, but we only started dating 6 months ago, nearly a year after I walked in on Roger and Kathy, and started the divorce process. Even though Kathy and I were married, neither I nor the law regarded my actions as adultery. I eventually achieved my goal. Kathy was initially opposed, but realized that knowing the entire story would not entice me back. She reluctantly signed the divorce papers and agreed to forego alimony. She made enough money and did not need it. She was considerate in the end. Children never entered our lives because her career came first, and frequent travel kept us occupied. We never got around to it. Roger and Laura Mason are her full-time priorities. She works for him and is likely his mistress. To be clear, she is still living with the Masons. Yes, full-time. I don't know anything about them because I have avoided them since my divorce. Maria's parents thought I was fine, and we had been married nearly 3 years. She quit her job 3 months ago and is expecting our first child any day. I make enough to support us. We don't want others to raise our child. Maria was kind enough to agree that I prefer a female. Watch how things go. I still love Kathy, but not as much. It's nothing compared to how much I adore Maria, and we're both content and committed.